So we heard Mr. Tsakiris before mentioning that from 2020 onwards we have seen increased marine claims due to the use of the new low sulfur compliant fuels. So that is actually a very good introduction for my presentation today, which is going to be on the necessity of the owners to exercise due diligence throughout this process of compliance with the rules. So very briefly, for those of you who may not know us, we're a marine consultancy survey firm based in Piraeus, offering services to the marine insurance market, the banks, and the ship owners. Myself, I'm a Naval Architect and Marine Engineer. I'm a surveyor with our firm and an associate member of the Association of Average Disasters. I will very quickly go through the first part of the presentation because we all know that what happened in 1st of January 2020 is that the sulfur cap dropped from 3.5 to 0.5% globally, and that one of the most popular ways to meet this requirement is to burn compliant fuels. So given that today's presentation will be on the use of low sulfur compliant fuel oils, I will stay a little bit longer on the threats associated with the use of such fuels. So the first two are the most important ones, which is the instability and the incompatibility. However, these two terms are very often being confused. And I want to make clear here that the stability is a property of one single fuel. It's actually how we measure its reserve to resist from precipitating into sludge, while the compatibility is actually a way to measure the suitability of mixing one fuel with another one. So two perfectly stable fuels can actually be incompatible when being mixed one with the other. So other threats are related to the cold flow properties of the new fuels. And the last one mentioned here is the presence of some chemical contaminants. Now, this is a very important aspect because these contaminants are not regulated into the ISO table. So they are actually an underlying danger, let's say. And very often arises the question here, how we can trace these chemical substances and how we can be contractually protected from them against our fuel suppliers. So for the first one, we'll talk later, but for the second one now, I just want to mention here that there is clause 5.2 in ISO that states that the fuel shall be free from any substances that can be proven to be dangerous for the health of the personnel or for the ship or her machinery. Now, keeping in mind all these threats, let's see 5 examples of the same type of compliant fuel, which have been analyzed and presented by Bureau Veritas Verifuel. And let's look at how different are the properties of the same type of fuel. So look first at the viscosities, right? You see that it ranges from 13 all the way up to 330 centistokes, which is a huge difference. And this has as a direct effect different required handling parameters, for example, different temperatures at the separators and the injection to the main engine. Now, having in mind these differences, imagine if the chief engineer on board is not aware of the different handling requirements of the fuel he is carrying, and does not manage to set correctly the handling parameters on board. So this will have a direct effect to the operation of the engine. Or imagine now mixing the fuel supplied, let's say, in region D with the fuel supplied in region E. Of course, these two fuels will be incompatible between them, and what will happen is that sludge will be formated in your fuel tanks, your filters may be clogged, your pumps may be stuck, and then there will be reduced flow of fuel to the engine. In simple insurance words, this is translated as more crew negligence claims. Of course, the Lloyd's underwriters would not stay silent in front of all that. Instead, they're being very cautious, they're being very alerted, and what they're doing is that they are issuing more warranties as a way to assess whether the ship owners are exercising due diligence throughout this process of compliance. And let's look at the wording. So the ship owners will be required, they will be looking into the method of compliance of the ship owners, their implementation plans, the crew training, any vessel modification, the fuel management on board, tank cleaning procedures, fuel testing, and any charter party amendments in this respect. We can go on and talk about each of this one in detail, but we will not do that today. I will just focus in 2 or 3 of the most important ones. The first one, which I consider very important, is the crew training. So the ship owners will need to perform a dedicated and comprehensive training to the crews. They need to raise the awareness of the crews about the peculiarities and the threats associated with these fuels, and they need to be able to demonstrate to their insurance that they have done so. Very importantly, on-board fuel management. Now, the options we said that you have when it comes to using a compliant fuel is to have marine gas oil with, of course, the associated cost issue, or use low sulfur compliant fuel oils, but these will need an ultra-correct onboard fuel management. And the need for such way of management is being dictated by the fact that given all the threats that we discussed, the safety factor is now decreased, so now every mistake is going to hurt. Problems resulting from not taking properly care of your fuel on board can result from incompatibility when you mix fuels on board from different suppliers, or in failing to properly handle the fuel. Now, the fuel suppliers are responsible for delivering to you stable fuels, but it is down to the competency of the crew to avoid mixing fuels from different suppliers on board and make sure that they are treating the fuel appropriately based on its specific parameters. Here I have listed very few practical guidance for onboard fuel treatment, like avoid mixing, take care with your purification on board, correct temperatures, correct feed rate, correct purifier disk, check frequently your filters, and perform analysis before and after your purifiers at least every 6 months. The last one is related to fuel testing. It is more important than ever now to know your fuel. You have to know your fuel. Now you have to perform analysis before burning the fuel that you are supplied. You have to avoid mixing the fuel, but in case you are obliged to do so, you always need to perform a compatibility test. There are spot tests that can be performed on board by the crew, and if the results are found to be suspicious, then they can be sent for further analysis to the laboratory. Another type of analysis, which is related to the chemical substances that we discussed earlier, it's the Dcms analysis, which is becoming more and more popular now because you can trace these unusual chemical compounds in the fuels. And I want to remind you that many issues were created with the use, when they found phenolic compounds in fuels that caused in Houston with a bunch of fuel that caused many problems to the machineries. And as a firm, I have to say that so far we see many claims that you see an on-spec bunker that it's according to the ISO table, but then things go wrong, and then you try to find what has gone wrong, and you have to go into doing a Dcms analysis to realize that there were chemical compounds there that they shouldn't be in a marine fuel. All these information, guidelines, and advices are included in our circulars, which can be distributed to you anytime if you wish so. I think I'm well on time, so I will go to the conclusion to wrap up this quick presentation. So we talked about having an option of burning marine gas oil or very low sulfur fuel oil with the quality and price difference there. We very briefly outlined some of the threats associated with the use of low sulfur compliant fuel oils, and the fact that Lloyd's underwriters are very alerted in this respect, based on the fact that more claims are coming because of the use of such fuels, and they're looking into ways to assess whether the owners are taking properly care of their ship and they're exercising due diligence while using such fuels. Now, the owners, they need to be very careful with their compliance and implementation plans. They need to exercise, they need to train their crews appropriately. They need to take extra care with the compatibility, segregation of the fuel, and the purification scheme on board the ship. they need to test their bunkers and make sure that they know the parameters of the fuels, and most importantly, that the crew is aware of the different parameters of the fuel they are supplied. And also they can incorporate charter party amendments to make sure that they have requirements for the fuel suppliers or the quality for their charterers. Now, looking at all this in the list, we understand that there is nothing entirely new, but now it's more important than ever to implement an ultra-correct onboard fuel management to avoid such problems. So, closing, I just want to rephrase this slide. We say in insurance words that we're going to have more crew negligence claims, but given the fact that Lloyd's underwriters are very alerted, it's going to be harder to prove now. Thank you very much.